Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be time travelers. We're going way back to uncover some of Earth's ancient climate secrets.
It's like detective work, but with rocks and sediment instead of fingerprints and clues.
Yeah, paleoclimatology, that's what we're talking about. And the case we're cracking open today takes us all the way to the Mahi River basin in western India.
A fascinating area, really. It holds a record of climate change stretching back over 100,000 years.
100,000 years. Wow. So we're going to be looking at how this region has dealt with, massive shifts in Earth's history.
Absolutely. It's one of the longest and most comprehensive records we have, at least on land in Western India. It's like this huge archive of environmental change.
Okay, so we've got this amazing archive, but how do scientists actually read it? I know our source material mentions a 2017 study by Chauhan and Morthekai. They looked at a specific spot at Rayka village, right? What did they find there?
Well, at Rayka, they have this incredible 25-meter-thick sequence of sediment. Imagine that a slice of Earth's history towering over you.
25 meters, that's like, what, 8 stories tall?
Something like that, yeah. And Chauhan and Morthekai, they went through these layers carefully, and they found everything from marine clay.
Marine clay, so that means this area was underwater at some point.
Exactly, to gravels, probably deposited by some really powerful river currents.
Wow, so as we go up through this sequence, we're literally seeing all these different environmental changes, right? What else did they find besides the clay and gravel?
Oh, all sorts of things. Layers of sand, silt, and even these ancient soil layers, they call them paleosols, like bookmarks in time.
Hold on, paleosols, those sound important. What exactly are those?
Think of it this way. Picture a period where everything's pretty calm. Good rainfall, lots of vegetation. Over time, the top layer of the Earth starts to change. It weathers, transforms. Eventually, it forms a distinct layer of soil. That's your paleosol.
Ah, I see. So a paleosol means things were pretty stable for a while, climate-wise.
Exactly. Stable enough for all that plant growth and soil formation to happen.
Okay, that makes sense. So by looking at what kind of sediment is there, whether there are paleosols, scientists can start to figure out how the environment in this region has changed, right?
Exactly. They can see when there were periods of heavy rain, strong river flows. Those leave behind thick layers of gravel. Then you've got drier periods marked by wind-blown sand deposits. It really paints a picture, of this dynamic climate history.
That is incredible. But how do they know when these changes happened? We're talking about events from tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years ago. How do you put dates on those layers?
That's where things get really cool. They use something called luminescence dating. It's like having a clock buried inside the Earth itself.
A clock buried in the Earth. Okay, now you have my attention.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work? Are there tiny little clock hands hidden in the sediment?
Haha, not quite. Think of it like this. Certain minerals, like quartz and feldspar, they're like little energy traps. They absorb energy from the surrounding sediment, natural radiation, that sort of thing. And the longer they're buried, the more energy they store.
So the longer they're down there, the more charged up they get.
Exactly. Then scientists can take these minerals, stimulate them in the lab, and they release all that stored energy as light. That's the luminescence part. The intensity of that light tells us how long the sediment's been buried.
So like those glow-in-the-dark toys, but instead of sunlight, it's radiation from the Earth charging them up. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it can't be that simple, right? There must be some challenges involved in accurately dating these sediments.
Oh, you're absolutely right. There are a few hurdles. One is something called anomalous fading. This mostly affects feldspar. Imagine a bucket with a small leak, slowly losing water over time. In a similar way, the energy trapped within the feldspar can kind of leak away.
Ah, so if your clock is leaking energy, that can definitely mess up your dates, right?
Right, it makes the sediment seem younger than it actually is.
Okay, that makes sense. So you've got these leaky clocks. Anything else that can complicate things?
Another one is partial bleaching. Think of it like sunlight resetting a clock. Exposure to sunlight can release some of the trapped energy. But river sediment, well, it might not always get completely exposed to sunlight before it gets buried. So it's like the clock wasn't fully reset.
So you've got potential leaks in your clock, and it might not have been set to 0 at the start. That sounds like a real headache for researchers. How do they even begin to deal with all that?
Well, they have some clever tricks up their sleeves. They can measure the fading rates in feldspar, for example, to try and correct for those age discrepancies. And they use statistical models to analyze how the energy is distributed within the minerals. It's very precise work.
It's like they're pulling out all the stops to make sure those dates are as accurate as possible. So it sounds like dating these sediments is a real puzzle. And then on top of that, deciding which dating method to use can also make a big difference in the results. Yeah.
You got it. They have to really consider the geology, the characteristics of each layer to pick the best approach.
So no one-size-fits-all solution here. In this case, how did they figure out the dates?
Well, Chauhan and Morthekai, they used a mix of techniques. Minimum age models, mean age models, even something called the beta heterogeneity concept, all to get the most reliable timeline for that sediment sequence.
Wow, it sounds like they really went all out to make sure their dating was solid. So they've got their dates.
Yeah.
What did all that careful detective work actually reveal? Anything surprising?
Oh, there were definitely some surprises.
Okay, so we've got this incredible sediment sequence all laid out, and our researchers have painstakingly dated each layer. What stories are those dates telling us about India's ancient climate?
Well, one of the coolest things is that we can actually link these dates back to some major global climate events. It gives us this glimpse into how this region was affected by those big swings between glacial periods and warmer interglacial periods.
Oh, right, the ice ages. So we can actually see how the Mahi River basin responded to those massive global temperature changes.
Exactly. For example, some of the older layers, the ones going back 66,000 years or more, they were probably deposited during a glacial period when the Earth was a lot colder and drier overall.
So if I could travel back in time, 66,000 years, and stand on the banks of the Mahi River, what would I see? Would it have been a totally different landscape?
Oh, most definitely. You'd be looking at a much drier environment, that's for sure. Less rainfall, maybe a less active river even. The landscape would probably be a lot more arid, with more of those wind-blown sand deposits we talked about.
So those layers are like snapshots from a time when the Mahi River was dealing with this much drier climate, probably because of that global ice age.
Yeah.
And as we move up through the sequence, I'm guessing we start to see evidence of those warmer, wetter interglacial periods, those times when the ice sheets retreated.
Precisely. And those paleosols, remember those? Well, one particular layer, dated to about 51,000 years old, it really stands out. It's a gray paleosol, and its presence, along with some other characteristics of the sediment, points to a much wetter climate, more rainfall, and likely a much more active river system.
So it's like we're seeing this transition unfold right before our eyes, this shift from a dry, glacial climate to a wetter interglacial period. Pretty amazing. But why does all this matter today? I mean, how does understanding these ancient climate shifts help us in the 21st century?
That's the key question. It gets to the heart of why paleoclimatology is so relevant. You see, by understanding how the Earth's climate has changed naturally in the past over these vast timescales, we get this baseline, a baseline for comparison.
Okay, so we're talking about separating the natural fluctuations from the changes we humans are causing.
Exactly. And by studying these long-term climate records, we can gain valuable insights into how ecosystems respond to those shifts in climate, how they might adapt even. And that's incredibly important as we face modern climate change.
So it's not just about piecing together ancient history. It's about understanding the present and, maybe even more importantly, using that knowledge to guide our actions as we move forward.
Absolutely. And this particular study, with its really careful dating techniques and analysis, it provides valuable data for those climate models, those computer simulations that are trying to predict future climate scenarios.
I'm starting to see how this research is much more than just a glimpse into the past. You know, it's really about connecting those dots between Earth's ancient climate history and the challenges we face today. Now, you mentioned some differences between this study's findings and some earlier research by Jual et al. It was back in 2000. Can you tell me a little bit more about those discrepancies? Like, what were the main differences they found in terms of the dates?
Yeah, so one of the most striking differences was in the dating of that key red soil horizon. Remember, we talked about that earlier. It's like the stratigraphic marker for the region. Well, Chauhan and Morthekai, they found that this layer, they labeled it RYKV33, was significantly older than previously thought.
Okay, so they're saying that red soil layer is actually a lot older. How much older are we talking about?
Well, their dating puts it somewhere between 26,000 and 47,000 years old, significantly older than those earlier estimates.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference. Why is that so important? Does it change how we think about the region's climate history?
It definitely does. It suggests that the process of soil formation, which requires very specific climate conditions, happened a lot earlier than we previously thought. It also highlights just how important it is to use these advanced dating techniques to really refine our understanding of the timeline of events.
So this red soil is like a benchmark, a marker in time. And by accurately dating it, we can get a clearer picture of when certain environmental conditions were present in the region.
Fascinating. So that red soil layer was a big one. Were there any other notable differences in the dates they obtained? Yes, definitely. For instance, they found that a sandy silt layer just below that red soil, they labeled it RYK33Y, was about 49,000 years old, and then a gray Paleosol layer, RYKV2, dated back to around 51,000 years. And all these findings are helping us fine-tune our understanding of the timing of those transitions between those drier and wetter periods.
It really is amazing, how these tiny grains of sediment can tell us so much about the past. Like each layer holds this little secret, a clue to the climate that existed when it was formed. What about some of the oldest layers they found? I'm curious about what those dates tell us.
Well, they dated a sample from a transition zone between different sediment types, they called it RYKVT, to about 54,000 years old.
Okay, 54,000 years. We're going pretty far back here. Anything even older than that?
Oh, yes. They found sandy horizons below another gravel layer labeled RKS1 that were estimated to be around 66,000 years old.
66,000 years, that's just mind-boggling. And I'm guessing that layer probably formed during a glacial period, right? Based on what we talked about earlier.
You got it. Most likely a time of colder, drier conditions. And if we keep going up in the sediment sequence, there's one layer that's even older.
Really? Even older than 66,000 years? What did they find there?
They dated this sandy silt layer. It sits above another gravel deposit. And they labeled it RYK1MG1 to an incredible 75,000 years old.
Wow, 75,000 years. I can hardly wrap my head around that kind of time scale. Yeah. But every single one of those layers is holding a piece of the puzzle, a clue to the climate of the past. So what does it all mean? How do these dates, these specific numbers, help us understand the bigger picture of climate change in the region?
That is the million-dollar question. And that's precisely what we'll be delving into next.
So we've traveled back tens of thousands of years, dug through layers of sediment, and uncovered some incredible secrets about the Mahi River basin and its ancient climate. What a journey this deep dive has been.
It really makes you appreciate the power of these seemingly simple layers of Earth, doesn't it? They give us this amazing window into a time long before humans were around to write things down.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, though, I want to make sure our listener is walking away with all the key takeaways. What are some of the most important things we've learned about how scientists are unlocking these climate secrets?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is just the ingenuity of the techniques they're using. Like luminescence dating, it's like they've invented a time machine, using tiny grains of sand and silt to travel back through millennia.
It's amazing to think about, right? Those tiny grains holding so much information about the past. And we learned that dating those sediments, it's not always a walk in the park. There are those challenges. The anomalous fading and partial bleaching.
Yeah, those really highlight the detective work involved in this field. It's not just about getting a number, it's about analyzing the data carefully, considering all those potential sources of error, and building a strong case for the age of each layer.
Like a forensic scientist, but for the distant past. And all that effort, that attention to detail, it's aimed at understanding how Earth's climate has changed, especially in response to those huge glacial and interglacial cycles.
Exactly. And by connecting those regional climate records, like the one from the Mahi River basin, to those global climate events, we get a much more complete picture of how the whole system works.
It's like adding more and more pieces to this giant puzzle, right? And the more we learn about how Earth's climate has changed naturally, the better prepared we are to understand and face the challenges of human-caused climate change today.
Absolutely. Paleoclimatology isn't just about ancient history, it's about understanding the complex system we live in and using that knowledge to help create a more sustainable future.
This has been a truly eye-opening journey. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. To our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the ancient rivers and climate secrets of the Mahi River Basin. We hope you've come away with a deeper appreciation for the power of paleoclimatology and the valuable lessons that Earth's history holds for us today.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop being amazed by our incredible planet.
Until next time, keep diving deep.